Hello and welcome back to the Let's Talk Basketball podcast. This is episode 2, and I'm joined by the MVP Cast podcast host, the Scotland-based journalist covering the BBL and the NBA. It's none other than Mark Woods. Mark, thank you so much for joining me.
No, worries. Nice to be here, Reese.
Okay. So how have you been? We kind of coming to the end of lockdown, but sort of still in limbo at this point. How's your pandemic, treated you so far?
It's been all right. I mean, it's interesting from a journalistic point of view because last week I interviewed athletes in person, and that was an incredible novelty, having done it for the first time in 6 months, because we all got sort of used to doing Zoom calls or phone calls rather than seeing people in person. I know this coming weekend, I'm actually going to see sport in person for the first time since early March, which will be quite a novelty. It won't be very good, but boy, I'm looking forward to it. So yes, it's been an interesting time from sport journalism because there's not been a lot of sport for a period of time, and then a lot of it's been done very remotely without the kind of access that we're all used to. But you make adjustments and you move on.
Absolutely, and you mentioned the sport coming back. Something that's near to me right now, being at my uni house, the BBL is coming back, and the announcement of that is, I could not be any more happy to finally be getting some basketball live now. So, are you going to be trying to catch as much of the returning BBL as possible?
Yeah, I'll be back. I'm pleased to say I'm back on commentary duties this season, which is good news. I think it's going to be a very interesting season in the BBL, and actually as much off the court as on the court, because you talk to a lot of teams over the last few months, and the bigger question is finance, and how do you firstly cope with not having full houses for any period of time? Some BBL clubs, that's not really a problem. That's what they usually have. But how will the numbers stack up for some of these clubs who rely on so heavily on their gate income to fund all their teams? So I think that's going to be a question for the league this issue. How do you get through it in some cases, which is going to be, it's about survival mode. And as one club said to me last week, this season's about us surviving to the next season. And that's a fair comment in the way that they look at things. And obviously for some other clubs, London Lions especially, it's an incredibly big season. So, it's a mix of contrasts. So I think it's going to be a fascinating year.
I mean, mentioning the London Lions, I mean, what a lineup they have. Do you think that they are basically on their way to becoming like the best sort of BBL team of all time with their roster?
That's been an interesting debate amongst a few of us I've spoken to. Of all time, I'm not sure, because there's been some really, really good teams back in the 1980s and 1990s with some fabulous players. Having seen Byron Mullins in a couple of preseason games now, I think he will dominate the BBL this year. He is a class above. As a team, I think they're an interesting mix. How they gel together, we'll need to see. It's still a work in progress. I think domestically, they will kill everybody. There's no doubt about that. Their budgets are way above, their talents are way above. Europe, we'll wait and see. It's hard. It's tough to judge at this point in time. And the all-time teams, I think all-time teams tend to come from all-time situations. When you go back to Nick Nurse, Chris Finch coaching Manchester, Sheffield last game of the season, on two incredibly deep and talented teams, lots of talented British players, talented American players. Maybe it's just like rose tinted glasses. That's what I remember when I was starting to cover the league. But we'll see. They'll be very good.
So with the Lions, they've got a huge roster. How do you think the rotation will work between the Champions League and also the actual BBL season?
I mean, the plan that they had obviously was to hopefully bring another 2 Americans in at the very least, and then rotate them around in the BBL. They put a proposal forward to the league. Wasn't quite not back, but it wasn't taken forward. They put it back again formally. Teams decided no, it was too late. In the words, I think it was never too late. You can change the rules if you wish to, but I think teams felt that was going to be unfair, based on obviously the fact they had already recruited their own teams for the season. And they thought, well, we can't really change our policies now, so why should you be able to change ours? So I see both sides of you. I think what will happen probably is you will see if, for example, London are playing, let's pick a name randomly, Glasgow on a Sunday afternoon. On the Wednesday, the following Wednesday, they've got a FIBA Europe Cup game or a Champions League game if they get through. Will they probably rest Byron Mullins for that? or rather than putting on a long trip to Glasgow, they probably will. So I think they have the depth to do it. That's why you have depth, and that's how you play the game. So I think that will work for them. The question remains is, do all their players stay for the whole season? If they're out of the Champions League, if they're out of the Europe Cup, that's a consideration that they'll have to make at the time. Is it worth keeping all of that talent and paying big money for it if you don't really need it? Let's be honest. You could do without one of them. I know. I spoke to Byron Mullins before his signing was confirmed, and he said to me, "I want to be here for the season. Like, this is a kind of personal project for me." So the soundings from him is that he wants to stay all year, but usage over a season, they will play a lot of games. So it will be an interesting challenge for Vince McCauley to rotate in, rotate out, decide who he wants to keep for the year, who he wants to release, and it's going to be fun to watch.
And if it's any coach to do that, it is Coach McCauley, because he's a fantastic coach, and he's kind of proved that over the seasons as well. So moving from London Lions on one end of the spectrum to potentially the other, there are certain teams that are potentially rebuilding for this season in the BBL. What kind of teams do you see that might struggle, coming into the new season?
I think Glasgow will struggle, no doubt. I mean, they've said that quite openly their budget's done. They said quite openly they're not bringing in Americans. My understanding is that there's a possibility they will bring in Americans after Christmas if budgets allow, but they, having been so close to the BBL Championship, their first ever league title when the season was called off, it's going to be a big drop for Rocks fans to watch from probably the best team they've ever had, or certainly the most successful team potentially they ever had, to being bottom of the league. I can't foresee any circumstance that they won't be the team that struggles this season. Above that, if you go, that Leicester and Newcastle will be strong. Worcester have got a good lineup. Plymouth have got a good lineup. So there's a sort of group of four there. I'm probably leaving someone out below that will have a nice healthy battle probably for second place. And for all the other teams, bar Glasgow, they've all sort of improved. Your Manchesters have improved this year. Surrey look good from the players I hear they're bringing in. I think that group again will be pretty competitive. So I think the good thing about the BBL over the last 2 to 3 years is that almost every night there's a competitive game. There might be a team that's the best. London this year may be an outlier in that they can kill teams by 40 if they really want to, I think, on certain nights. But below that, generally, it's pretty healthy competition, and that's what you want. You don't pay to see a 40, 50-point blowout, which we had with the likes of Leeds and Manchester a few years ago. So that's good for the league. So it makes it competitive, and you feel like for most of the time your team's got something to play for.
Yeah, and to be fair, like I'm just thinking about it, with this stacked London Lions team, that could improve ticket revenue, potentially for this season if safety measures are put in for each team. And I'm not sure if anything has been said on how they are going to actually do like the stadiums. Are they going to fill the arenas, or are they going to have like a social distance sort of approach?
At the start, every team will have to socially distance, so you'll have some capacity issues. Obviously, if the Lions, it helps that you're at the Copper Box. I think the big question that teams are asking, and they want clarity whether it's London or Scotland in terms of government, is it 1 metre or 2 metres? That's a huge chance of right across the board. It's not just basketball. They want some affirmation that when doors can reopen, depending on where you are in the country, that you could, if it's 2 metres, you're going to struggle. You'll struggle to fill stadia or fill arenas in any meaningful fashion. If you go to 1, and obviously most people are going in some kind of group, then it becomes doable. You can probably get up to, if say you're Newcastle, you can probably go up to about 50% capacity. That's not bad in terms of money's coming in. You can keep your season ticket holders happy, and you can keep your corporates in some respects. I don't know how you do it, but you find ways to do it. So therefore, it becomes a bit more viable. And that's where the clarity isn't quite there yet. I mean, once the test events are run, Newcastle have got, of course, we've got pre-seasons, one of the designated test events. I think once those are done, and all the clinical directors of the Hope Nations and the chief scientific officer and medical officers get together, and then they come up with the magic number, that's the point, I think, where teams can really sit down and go, okay, this is going to work, or oops, we've got a problem here. So the answer is we don't really know yet.
Yeah, and moving away from the BBL, you've been covering sport for quite some time now, and I just wanted to sort of get to know where your journalistic beginnings started, like where the journey inside journalism began for you.
I mean, I suppose like yourself at university, that's where it started. I started writing both for student newspapers, but I also started writing for newspapers, and I was remarkably back then covering some student sport for some national papers. I remember writing about student basketball for the Daily Telegraph, which seems absolutely improbable these days. But back in the day, newspapers would pay terrible amounts of money for that. But that was really my start. And I think I was quite fortunate in coming through in an era where newspapers were covering more diverse types of sport than they do now. Now it's very focused on football and rugby and cricket. It's focused on the things that generate web traffic. That's brutally the way it is. I was lucky in that, when I started out, even covering basketball, which was my first thing, and it was, as it is now, an incredibly small niche, but newspapers would cover that. They would, I remember writing a match report for a paper on the FIBA Women's European All-Star game. It was a 200-word match report. And this was in a British newspaper. Unthinkable that a paper would pay for that now, because frankly, who was reading it then? I don't know. But they felt it was a good thing and they were happy to pay me for it. So blimey, I was going to go for it. So, my sort of route came in through doing small pieces of journalism. As most people know, I edited a website called Britball, which was one of the very first sporting websites, which was about British basketball. And the reason I did it is I felt there was a market niche. It was a purely sort of hard-nosed corporate decision to say, I think there might be something in this, no one's covering it. And that probably gave me the context to get into the sport in a much more meaningful manner. And they've not got rid of me yet, which is quite extraordinary. And then after that, I worked for the NFL for a while. So I went into the sort of media relations side of things. But again, I always think it was a very useful route, because I think in journalism, and I'm guilty of this sometimes, you have to understand there is a bit of it's a two-way process. You understand sometimes what's in it for the athlete, or perhaps for their sponsor, quite often these days, and what you want out of it as well. There's an interaction there, and it's quite useful sometimes to be on the other side of the fence and have a peek and see how it goes on. So I quite enjoyed my time at the NFL. It gave me exposure to American football, which is another sport I did spend a bit of time covering in the past. So, and then I basically come out of that and became a full-time journalist. So, there was a slow and steady build there, but I think it's like anything else. The more experience you have, the more different points of view, the more things you can do, the more it helps.
That's an amazing first start. I mean, imagine going from just writing about student games and then eventually ending up with the NFL. That's insane. So, what was the first instance that you actually got hooked on the sport of basketball?
I mean, I played it as a kid. So I went to games. As a kid, my team is Belfast Star of the Sea, as it was called, and that was my team growing up, and it's still my team today. And that's who I watch. And and everyone, you always get levels as your journalist of your boss for this team, or that's your team that you support. That's my team. There's no BBL team that I've ever supported. So I can say neutral on that. So I went to see games as a kid, and I was entranced by the Americans coming in and all the glamour of these exotic foreigners landing up in Belfast, where I was brought up. But then I think you also saw the game on Channel 4 on a Monday night. People still talk about it. I remember that when I was very small. But I always remember the Solent Stars, their sort of gold or silver jerseys, which seemed incredibly exciting, and you tune in to watch the second half of a game, and it was it was brilliant, because this was basketball from your country on the television set, and it was wonderful stuff. And I suppose everyone gets seduced by the NBA. My start was very much indigenous, and then I think later when having I played the game right through university, it was always a sport that I just enjoyed. But I think the start for me in terms of real interest, I remember going down to the as it was, I think it was called the Metro Arena then. I think it might even just still been the plain old Newcastle Arena before it was sullied by sponsorship, on a a Friday night to see Newcastle Eagles against London Towers, and Kevin Cadle was coaching. I think it was Craig Lynch was coaching the Eagles, and it was a full house. I ended up randomly being on court shooting a basket at halftime, terrible, fantastically so. But I was seduced by the potential of this sport, and that was, I suppose, for me, really where I set up a website to cover it at that point, because I thought, here's a really great product. This is, it's done very well. Obviously, behind the scenes, both teams, I'm sure, were losing tons of money, but you could see the sort of passion for that. You could see the potential for the sport and the growth at that point. And sort of being there that night, I thought, well, what can I find out more about this? Where can I read an interview with that player, or how can I get I don't know, stats and all that kind of stuff? It wasn't available, so I thought, well, I'm going to start it myself. So I always say that going to that game was quite pivotal in my career ultimately, because I went to something. I went to a game as a fan, and I thought, this could be good. And being a journalist coming through at that point in time, it gave me something that I could focus on.
I mean, you talk about it, kind of being a niche now, but it was also a niche back then. So it's sort of kind of what I'm trying to do in sort of trying to get into a sport that I love through the means of journalism and trying to build it up from the foundations that it's on now. And being from, yourself being from Ireland, and the UK itself, you don't really see a lot of the big names from England or from the UK or Ireland go and make a star of themselves in the NBA. One of those, Pat Burke went over to the NBA, one of the only NBA players that was Irish. So I know that you've spoken to him yourself. What was it? What was it like knowing that someone that from where you lived was playing as a big star?
Well, let's be clear. Pat's from the other part of Ireland.
Oh, yeah.
But it was nice. I mean, Pat moved to the US when he was quite young. So, but I have to say, I know when I used to cover more Irish basketball as well, there was a great deal of pride in Pat making it. And to Pat's credit, he never forgot where he was from, and still doesn't forget where he was from. And I remember going over to interview him when he was with Orlando in his first NBA season, and he was telling me about the amount of messages he'd had, and people who'd been in touch, and he's always understood that is a very special place he has a very special place in sporting history. And then the same for a lot of the British players that have gone to the NBA. Most of them appreciate that they are quite unique, and they have got somewhere to representing a country. I mean, I've spoken a number of times to Chris Harris, who was the first Brit in the NBA back in the 1950s. Now, Chris left again when he was as a kid. He's been back a few times since, but he's very much American. He settled there, and that's where he's from. But if you ask him, is that special to him? Yes, it is. To be the first from a particular country is nice to do. Steve Bucknell, was the second many years later. And Steve, I remember the excitement that people had. You remember reading about it in the newspapers. Here's a Brit playing for the LA Lakers. Wow, that doesn't happen very often. It still hasn't happened very often. So, I think there is an inspirational value in seeing players from your country do well. And in this country, we probably, when we had a kind of golden period in the sort of turn of the last decade, where we, in and out, we had about 5 or 6 NBA players from this country. We didn't really appreciate it. We didn't really sell it. The people who ran the sport really didn't take advantage of that and talk them up. And we kind of lost that. And I also feel they should have got more. They should have got more appreciation for what they were doing. In the same way that if you go to France, Tony Parker, Nico Batum, they're all household names. They're idols of the country. They're getting big awards. They're invited to meet the president. People care. People really care about them, as they should. When we had, Lowell Dane, Pop Spencer, Robert Archibald, all those guys in the league, they kind of passed on by, and people didn't really know. So I think was a great shame, both for them and for the sport itself.
Yeah, and when I first heard about getting into basketball, I was like, oh my God, there's a Brit in there, Luol Deng, and as soon as he went to the Miami Heat, which is my team, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. I can't believe that I've got someone from my home country. it was sort of like the dream that I could make it to. Obviously, I didn't, and I'm sat here right now. I didn't ever make it past the high school stage. So, but it does give that dream to potential people that do want to play basketball here in the UK. It sort of gives them a dream. But again, we'll probably get onto this a bit later. But the basketball isn't really a big sport here in the UK, which is a massive shame. But while we do have you here, Mark, it would be an absolute crime of me not to mention the bubble and sort of give a little bit of analysis of the bubble so far. So what are your thoughts? Obviously, we're going into the second round right now. What are your kind of thoughts on the NBA team so far?
I think it's been £100 million very well spent by the NBA. It's working incredibly well. The protocols have worked well. Yeah. The quality of basketball, once teams kind of ironed the ring rust out, has been very good. It's a good televisual product, which is the main thing, because that's where most of the cash is coming from. So I mean, let's be honest about this. It was to make sure they still got their TV money. Yeah. So mission accomplished. I think in speaking to people over there, and this goes for the WNBA bubble as well, I think it's a tough place to be. I think it's easy for us to sit here and watch the games and say, "Isn't this great?" And it's the normal playoff intrigue. It doesn't, in some senses, feel any different. But when you speak to, I've got friends working in the media there and other roles, it's a hard, because you're getting to the point now where you could be in there for almost 4 months, and the NBA teams in this week, the teams that get through the second round are allowed families in, but coaches aren't allowed families, support staff aren't allowed families, media certainly aren't allowed families, referees aren't allowed families. So it's a long time to be away, and I think if you add to the situation of protests outside and the fight for social justice that we saw so visibly last week with the Bucks players and then other teams subsequently boycotting games, it's mentally, it's tough. I tip my hat off to all the players who are continuing to perform at a high level, because so many people are going, we could have another, we're recording this on the 1st of September, 6 weeks of this. Yeah. Away, shut away from the outside world. And despite the fact that the Disney complex is not a bad place to be, we all like spending our holidays at Disney. It's not quite like you're on the roller coasters and shaking hands with Mickey Mouse and having candy floss every single day. It's tough going. There is, although these players are paid incredibly well for this, it's a tough assignment. So fair play to them for doing what they're managing to do, and everyone that's through it. But I know at the start of this, I was kind of envious of colleagues who were going in to cover it, even though they were having to stay in their rooms for a week without going out, or they were allowed to go out for like 10 minutes every day to get a test. I don't kind of feel that envy anymore.
Definitely. And it was sort of like watching the little glimpses of inside the bubble that we get, like the little vlogs that are on YouTube of JaVale McGee, who's someone that I followed as well. And it's like, when it first started, it was very ominous and very the aura around it was very eerie, and you do get sense of if you don't really suffer well on your own, it could be quite a dark place to stay inside in isolation for quite some time.
Players are used to going on road trips, so you can end up in a situation where occasionally you'll have a road trip which could be 2 to 3 weeks if say San Antonio have their annual rodeo trip when their arena is used for the rodeo, so you're away from home for a bit, or you could be away for camp for a few weeks, and so you get used to being with the same players. You'll have dinners on the road, some guys will stay in their rooms some nights, etc., but there's a rhythm to that. But this is way beyond it, way beyond it, and there'll be a huge, there is a huge amount of gaming going on. There's guys that'll be playing golf every other day, etc. There are things to do, but it's not quite the same as going home at times. We all like to be back in our own beds, as they say. Guys who have got kids, parents who they can only talk to on FaceTime. I mean, it's personally, who wouldn't find that hard? You'd have to be pretty cool not to. So it isn't really surprising that last week, I think part of that was players just kind of going, this is too much. I'd like to be somewhere else other than this. That's not surprising. That's human nature. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. I think, as teams get to the end, yes, of course you focus on the championship, but I imagine for all those teams that went out at the end of the first round of the playoffs or went out at the end of the playoff games, yes, you'd be disappointed, but there undoubtedly will have been guys there that went quite glad.
Yeah, let's get out of here while we can. And you talk of the championship, the finals will be happening, in a number of weeks' time. Who do you see in the finals from the East and the West?
I mean, it's a battle of LA in the West. I think I don't see two teams better than that in the NBA. Really, I think it's a coin toss between who's better. I mean, you look at the Clippers with Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, you're a great tandem, but you still sort of feel that they're feeling that out about what's their best lineups. Doc Rivers has shuffled things around. It's a brand new team. It's not been through the playoffs together, and I think they're still adjusting to how they work very well together. But you've got playoff Kawhi, that's always fantastic. So they're a great team. The Lakers may look a little bit more balanced. They haven't had Rajon Rondo for a bunch of this playoffs. He will come back. They're probably lacking a little bit of a sort of secondary playmaker at the moment. But I think that duo of LeBron James, Anthony Davis, and the cast they put around them are very formidable. So, for me, that shades it a little bit in the West. In the East, I think everything's really up in the air. You've seen the Bucks losing game one of both their two series so far to Miami Heat, which I'm sure you in the second one, which I'm sure you loved.
Yes, I have my
yes. The knock on the Bucks has always been is that they're the past few years they've been a great playoff team, and this goes back actually to Mike Budenholzer's time in Atlanta as well. He is a coach who gets a great sort of stuff out of his team during the regular season, but doesn't necessarily make the adjustments come the playoffs. And you've got a great player like Giannis. You've got Chris Middleton's a fantastic second banana. You've got talent around it. But what's your adjustments that you're going to do? And I watched the Bucks I think 3 times in the States around the turn of the year, and again you could see the strength that they had then was consistency. They do the same thing every night. And I was asking Bud about this. And he said to me, we don't change our game plan too much depending on opponent. That's fine during the regular season. In the playoffs, that doesn't work. You have to make adjustments. So we've seen little signs of that. That does give me areas of concern. I think they are the best team, but will they end up as the East champions? I'm not sure. There are other teams. Celtics are playing very well. The Raptors have the potential to come back despite a horrific game one against Boston. Miami looking very good. I still think the Bucks probably will out and end up in the finals, but do I think that they have enough to beat the Clippers or the Lakers? No, I'm not sure. So if you want to tip, the
Lakers to win it. I mean, with the East, I mean, with I think I see Boston going through. Just on the fact, in the bubble, the Raptors haven't lost a game other than to the Celtics. So that is quite, the stat that, it's kind of that bogey team at the moment. And with, you mentioned the Bucks' inconsistencies. Well, too much consistency, if that. And I think it's the ability to adapt on the fly, especially with this Miami team who are trying out new, lineups and new rotations constantly. It's kind of getting the better of the Bucks as well.
Well, you've got a great matchup between Bam Adebayo and Giannis. And there is, if you had to get a prototype defender for Giannis, it would be him, because he's got the strength of a center, but he's also got the speed of a point guard, and that's really what you want to go up against Giannis. Now, you're not going to stop the Greek Freak completely. He will be the MVP undoubtedly this season for a very good reason. But if you can force him into trickier situations, if you force his teammates to have to make adjustments to compensate for that, then it becomes all the more difficult. And you've got a very driven Jimmy Butler, Goran Dragic, who I think is still the best player in the NBA not to have been an all-star, and he's been coming off the bench for a lot of the season, but as a starter, he's been exemplary in the playoffs or in the bubble. So they have the talent and the pieces to stop the Bucks. If the Bucks adjust, I think they'll still win. But they are asking all the questions that we expected to be asked of the Bucks at some point.
Yeah, and moving on to a brand new segment here that I'm featuring on the Let's Talk Basketball podcast. It is called Out of Bounds. And Mark, you have brought three things that you would like to discuss and present that you would like to chuck out of basketball. So please, would you like to present your first offering?
Well, I'll take these in no particular order. I think first thing I would throw out is TV timeouts. And yeah, this is obviously an NBA specific issue, but you see it in European basketball as well. And I'll read you the rules here for the NBA. I just thought I'd write them down. There must be 2 timeouts in each quarter. Each quarter, if no team is called a timeout for the 6:59 mark, a timeout is charged to the home team. And if no timeout is taken prior to the 2:59 mark, a timeout is charged against the team not previously charged with a timeout. So therefore, it's brilliantly simple. There you go, to start with. But the first and second timeouts in each quarter are 2 minutes and 45 seconds for locally televised games and 3 minutes and 15 seconds for network games. Now, if you, as I do, watch the NBA on League Pass, you begin to appreciate what a waste of time these things are. And we talk about pace of game. I mean, basketball's relatively quickly. It's not the NFL. But you sit down and you see the feed and you see players twiddling their thumbs, picking their noses, faffing around when they could easily be back on the court because advertisers are paying. No, let's be honest. Advertisers pay for the basketball. So we're not knocking. We know why this happens. But as a spectator, it's incredibly dull. And you sit as an NBA game for 3 minutes and 15 seconds with nothing happening. And the novelty of someone bouncing off a trampoline dressed as a fuzzy bear wears off pretty damn quickly. So I think, what I like during the playoffs and that the NBA's experimented with, and we've seen it in other leagues, we've seen it in the Bundesliga did it as well during their restart, is more in-game advertising. So, if say the ball goes out of bounds or there is free throws we've seen in the NBA, that an advert comes up and plays during that for 10 seconds. And the idea of that is to try and remove some of those TV timeouts or at least shorten them. So I think that's the way sports are going to go because we don't, it's another source of revenue. If you're a game like football where you don't stop, there's no timeouts, that's another way to shoehorn adverts in. So it's better for them. It doesn't really bother you. It doesn't affect the coverage of the game. But yeah, I think less of those TV timeouts would be absolutely fabulous.
You know what? I can't argue with that. Less TV time. The timeouts. Especially I actually didn't realize that was a rule. So that you've actually broadened my knowledge of the game here. So you know what? The timeouts out of bounds. So would you like to offer your second idea?
Well, one of the things I'm jealous of, and I've had this conversation with a couple of colleagues in the NBA bubble, is that they are back sitting at courtside. This is a purely personal one. And I remember when I first started covering the NBA, you had courtside seats. You had absolute ringside seats to this action. I remember the very first NBA game I ever covered. I can't remember the opponent was, but it was the Orlando Magic. And I was in the very front row, behind the basket. Ben Wallace charged towards to try and get a rebound and flung himself right across in front of me to try and save the ball, almost took my laptop out. It was quite frightening, but it was absolutely thrilling. And I thought that was great. And one of the perks of that is that you could really hear what was going on. You could hear what the coaches were saying. You could hear what the players were saying. It gave an incredibly good feel to the way that you reported on the game because you got great sightlines. Now, I went to a game this season, and I pretty much could touch the ceiling. And that's unfortunately the way it's gone because teams not that long ago realized, why are we giving free seats to these guys who don't pay us anything when we could be filling those seats with highly expensive paying customers who will pay $10,000 to sit in that particular seat. So I understand the rationale of it, but I very much miss it because it was a great way to get insights to a game that you wouldn't have otherwise had. And the whole point of a journalist watching a game is to then convey those insights to the fan, to the reader, to the listener at home. So I think fans lost out in a way because of that. So if I was going to throw out anything, it would be the nosebleed seats for the media.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, as an aspiring journalist, I hope to be, courtside as much as possible. And you kind of have to soak in the atmosphere from the ground as a journalist to get the proper feel. Say if you're writing a report, to get like the actual, to make sure that your audience and your reader feel like they're there in the arena that the game that they missed.
Well, you see little things. I mean, it's amazing. Just when you just see someone tugging at someone, or you see her, you can sometimes see the brilliance of players really well up close in a way that you can't see it on television or from quite a distance, and you get a much more of a sense of the chemistry and the personalities that are going on in court. And I spoke to a mate who's a football writer, and he said one of the great things about closed door stadia is you can hear some of the chatter on the pitch, even though they're still sitting a little bit removed from the field. The fact that there's no fans in and no noise means that you can pick stuff up, and you can hear what a coach is shouting or a manager shouting, etc. It makes you more informed about what is going on and why it's going on, because when you write reports or you're covering things these days, it is much less about the what happened. It's about the why it happened, because people can watch it on television, the what happened for themselves, or on Twitter or wherever they want to pick it up. And I think that informed part of it was lost at the point when they kicked the media out of the good seats upstairs, and put them upstairs. But hey, they're making lots of money out of it, so what can we do?
Yeah, not really much. So as a man that spends most of his time on the, around the basket and sometimes completely under the basket, the University of Worcester Arena, the nosebleed seats for the journalists, out of bounds. There we go. And your final offering, please, Mark.
Well, the final one, and this will come as no surprise to anyone that reads me or knows me. The other thing I'd throw out is the home countries in basketball terms. I have always stood back from sport in this country and thought, why have we got England, Scotland, Wales, and sometimes Northern Ireland added in as well in sport? And we all know why. It's an historical anomaly, but dating back to the days when some posh boys from Eton founded governing bodies, and so, let's have one from Mother England, and then eventually let the Scots in, because they had to have someone to play. And that's historically what's happened. I've never really understood the fact we have a country called the United Kingdom and we have different governing bodies covering sports. For me, it's different teams. I know people will shout, "Oh, well, I want to paint my face with a saltire and support Scotland." I get it; it exists, but let's step back from it. It shouldn't do. You don't get regions of France or Mexico or Spain or whatever, or states in the state, inside the US having these things. So it's an anomaly. It happens. It shouldn't happen. We've got it. But I don't think it's good for sport. And we take it into basketball terms. This is we have a sport in this country that is disjointed, which is political, of which, politics is okay if you're all sort of going for the common cause, but, people are fight their own corners, people do different things. There's not really any cohesion for it. There was a point when we had a stronger British Basketball Federation for a few years, and you hoped maybe it would grow to be effectively the overlord, a single overlord for the game, at least in Great Britain. And the home nations would work under that, but for it, and would take its lead. And there was discussions that there wouldn't be chief executives of the home nations. They would purely be chief operating officers. And they would get rid of the CEOs, because the CEO direction came from the middle. And then, of course, there was a kind of coup. That all hope of that ended, and now we're back to politicking, particularly between England and everyone else, and a grab for who owns the Great Britain teams and who controls them and all that kind of stuff. And we're back to where we were probably 15 years ago, in that everyone's fighting for their own corner and everything's doing things separately, and there's so much duplication, there's so much money spent where there doesn't need to be spent. And if I ruled the world, I would not have home nation associations in any sport. I would dump them all and have a unified structure, because I think that's the best way to develop the game. It's the best thing for the players and the coaches and the teams, and that should be the priority. And I think that's forgotten about a lot of the time. So it's let's go for one, and let's not go for three or four, and that'll make everything magically better overnight.
So home nation, I mean, again, you've had a clean sweep here. Home nations, out of bounds, and you're 3 for 3 here on the first ever out of bounds segment. So if you guys listening or watching here on YouTube, thank you so much for listening to that segment. If you like it, then let me know. So moving on to kind of the main topic, you briefly mentioning it, I kind of want to advance on what you just said with the home nations, and that's growing the NBA or just basketball in general. inside of the UK and Ireland, and that's kind of like because if you think of sport over here, you have cricket, rugby, and football. Those are the three kind of main ones, and maybe netball as well or tennis. Would you not say so? For because I mean I'm looking at it as a perspective. Growing up in PE, the boys would always do football and rugby, and then the girls would do rounders and netball. So would
Sorry,
you?
I should have put netball in that segment.
Oh,
I should have got rid of netball. That would be good.
I mean, to be fair, it is it is the worst type of basketball. So with the the lack of basketball inside of the UK, where do you think it goes wrong that we don't all unite as the entire of the United Kingdom to support such an exciting sport like basketball?
I think it's popularity. Popularity's never been the issue because you get what you want first and foremost is kids playing it. That's not a problem for basketball. It's never been a problem. So that's your foundation is there. It's what happens out of that. Our club structure is terrible. We don't have a really good organized club structure in the same way you have in places like France and in Spain. You have clubs doing little bits of things, but not there's no holistic approach. There's no kind of, if you go into one club, you get teams from under 10s, possibly even all the way up to senior level in every part of the country. You don't have a consistency of approach in the way that coaching is undertaken. The league structure is okay, but you need clubs to feed into that. So I think that's not been a focus for various reasons. Part of that's actually government policy, I think, has been an issue. Clubs weren't seen necessarily as important by Sport England and Sport Scotland. I don't know about Sport Wales and Sports NI, but it wasn't seen as a focus, and I think that was left sort of for people to go to their own devices. And you also have the professional game. I think at the top level you need investment, and that investment was there at one point, but it wasn't invested very well. It was done for good reasons, but it didn't come off, and that's there's historical reasons for that. And 20 years on, people had need to stop using that as an excuse. So I think basketball just needs to be better at making itself better. And you so often get people using the F word, funding. We don't get enough funding. Why don't we get funding? If we had more funding, we could do all these things. Most of the problems that basketball have are nothing to do with funding. It is to do with focus. It is to do with infrastructure. It is to do with organization. And primarily, it's to do with vision. It's not a sport that's had a vision. We've seen 3, 4, 5. I've lost count of the amount of reviews of this sport that there's been over the last 20 years. Most of them were pretty sensible. Most of them had decent ideas in them. And at the end of the day, they weren't carried through. They were allowed to sit on a shelf, gather dust, and they were quietly chucked in the recycling bin. So, until you get more visionaries in the sport, and I don't see any of them there at the moment, then who's going to have the vision for it to go forward to the next level?
Yeah, and I think I've spoken to many people on this on this channel and podcast that I think that this could be a great idea, especially coming out of a lockdown. So so sort of generate a bit of revenue for the league as well, and that is when everything's all set and clear, potentially 2021 might be the time to do it. Is an all-star week. Like, not an all-star week, but like an all-star day. You set people in like a middle ground, maybe like the NEC or something, or get fill out a whole crowd. It's like, oh, sell it as flashy dunks, a 3-point contest, and then you get the WBBL and the BBL all-star games. I think that could potentially do well.
I used to really like All-Star Weekend. It was great fun, and it was great for the players. They enjoyed it. Excuse me.
Flu season.
Yes, and the flu is kicking in. The players loved it. They got paid for it, so they like to be there. But it was a chance to impress and show off. Yeah. And for the fans, it was great to watch. I think, I can't remember why it was cancelled or why it was dropped off, but it was something to look forward to mid-season. And people came to watch it. And it was great on television. And if you were watching on Sky, and you didn't know who these guys were, and you tuned in, it was a showcase to show who your best talent was, and that was a great way to do it. And I'm sure it's been discussed bringing it back at various points. No one's thought to do it, I think, for cost reasons. But yeah, you would love to see it.
You'd bring in so many casuals, and a lot of people's first memories of certain players, like individual players, like a love for the game doesn't come without his individuals. And you think Michael Jordan leaping from the free throw line, you think of Julius Erving, Vince Carter and his amazing dunks, when they brought it back in 2000, like. You think of all these special moments from All-Star Weekend. I mean, you got the celebrity games. Kevin Hart's become a massive star over there. You got Drake, who's now becoming a huge part of the Raptors organization. Do you see, like, why wouldn't they bring like an All-Star just event, a huge event where it's like 5 hours, concessions, everything run by them? Why wouldn't they put that on?
Pardon me. I think money is the issue. Is could you guarantee that you would make a return on it? I think they probably could. The BBL do one thing extremely well, which is sell tickets. I think the NBA All-Star is very much a showcase, and it is their equivalent of Super Bowl in the sense it is when you service your sponsors. It is when you get your corporates in and put your arm around them and say, look, come up close, we can let you behind the curtain in a way that you can't do during the NBA finals or regular season games, because the players are playing. This is a bit more informal. It's a massive beast. It's very good fun. I'm not sure the games are always particularly brilliant, but it is a way to sell yourself. It's your annual trade show where you get all your sponsors together, you get your potential sponsors together, and you show off. And that's what the business case for NBA All-Star is. It's great for the fans, and if you're in a host city, you get to go to all the showcases and the different types of come along and watch the guys practice type things that they have. I mean, it's great from that point of view. But for the NBA, it's a business meeting. It's a giant business sales show, and I think for the BBL, that's possibly what they could use it for.
Yeah, exactly. And, they have the advertising in this country that could potentially get on board, especially if they were able to get, maybe not like a TV spot for the entire season, but a TV spot for that one weekend or that one even day, for instance. They can get the TV revenue, they could get the sponsor revenue, and that could then bring up the hype for potentials to come in. Say, like past legends that have gone off to America from the UK, come back and play in this like a celebrity endorsed game as well.
Well, we've had celebrity games; they've been pretty terrible. So let's not get carried away with celebrity games.
Even the star power to earn the revenue, but
like the Legends games are quite good at NBA All-Star game. I think there's so much there, and I think it's the good thing about NBA or about BBL All-Stars was it was a kind of gathering of the clan for a weekend, because you had, when you used to have finals weekend, everyone would show up, even the teams that weren't playing in it. You would get guys would come along. You would get past players coming down to catch up with everyone. So it was a nice sort of reunion, but All-Star was probably the main time for that, because it was also a huge night out. The players really liked that as well, particularly when they had it in Newcastle. Boy, that was a hell of a night out. But I think you need to have more opportunities to sell the sport, and one-off games, as we've seen with the playoff final at the O2, it's a big selling opportunity. Yeah. So, if they bring it back, it gets my vote.
Absolutely. We're kind of like sort of starting the fact, like, because we had like a big part where Sky Sports were covering the BBL. Do you see like another boom period for the BBL coming, within the next 10 years or so?
I'd love to say yes, but based on past experience, I'd like to say I don't know. And there's always been another boom period just around the corner, which hasn't come since back in the early 2000s. You hope so. I mean, I think the product's good enough. I think the teams are, by and large, a lot smarter than what they were. They're much more cohesive in the way they go about things. They share knowledge a little bit more. It's not to say that the BBL is united in any way. There's still a lot of self-interest there. But, I think people understand if they don't work, you're only as strong as your weakest link. And if you aren't trying to make that better, then it's not going to really work. I think the problem they have, And the problem, every single league outside of football, cricket, and rugby, as the three sports you previously mentioned, is TV money. People, Sky, BT, DAZN, the players coming in, they're not spending money on anything other than those three sports. And unless you're a sport that shows you can drive an audience, you will not get big TV money. You will probably end up as the likes of netball do. You pay to be on television. You pay all the costs of it. No, it's variations in a theme. And so the boom probably has to be on filling arenas. That's where the boom will be. If the Lions can fill the Copper Box, that would be huge. If other teams can fill up their arenas, that would be absolutely massive. But that's where the next stage for growth. If you can prove that, then at least you get good slots on television. You get good slots on television, you get sponsors. And the more sponsors you get, the more you can improve your product, and the more people want to invest. And the investment is probably the key to unlocking that to the next stage. So is there a boom period there? I don't know, but if there is a trajectory at the minute, and there is the potential for it, there's nothing really holding the BBL back at the moment apart from itself. And you can see things like the Lions going into Europe with investors coming in. That's a nice start. I mean, we may look back in 10 years and go, that was the point where it started to take off again. And let's hope so. But with the BBL, you just don't know, because the British basketball as a whole has a terrible, terrible habit of shooting itself in the foot at various points. And one of these days, hopefully, they get it right.
And we're back. Sorry, we had a bit of a technical difficulty kind of there with audio issues, but we're back, and I'll continue. Continue my point of the London Lions. Could they come in and sell out everyone else's arenas with their stacked teams? Like, say, if they continue the momentum of this year, and they can come over to every other arena, build stacked teams each year, sell out arenas, because then the teams that are hosting them can be like, oh, the London Lions are coming to town, come along and watch them play, and that grows up the fan base of the BBL even more.
The truth is, no, I don't think so. And I think the test case last season was when Obi Soko was playing for the Lions, and I was really intrigued to see what the impact when that was going to be. And I remember walking through Westfield Shopping Mall, which is just beside the Copper Box, and you saw Ovi's face front and center in the billboards, and it was almost like, come and see Ovi Soko, and by the way, he's playing for the London Lions. And that was their strategy. And there was an uptick in their crowds that was healthy and was good, but it wasn't selling out games. It wasn't bringing an extra 5,000 people through the door. And the few times I saw Lions on the road, I think once at Newcastle and once or twice in Glasgow, I didn't really sense there was any major uptick, simply because there was a popular figure coming along to the arena, and you sort of hope with that social media following, that's what London thought with the deal that they signed with him, that he might engage an untapped audience. There was a little bit in London, but it wasn't significant. So I think it will still be incumbent on each team to grow its own fan base. Yes, there'll be certain people that are intrigued by coming along to see Byron Mullins in the flesh this year, but again, it's not like they've signed Kevin Durant in the sense that the man in the street knows who that is, or Steph Curry or LeBron or whatever. I mean, Byron Mullins, bless him, doesn't carry that huge name recognition. So I don't think it makes any difference. I think it does. I think what it does, though, is it throws down the gauntlet to other teams and go, right, if we've got this, what investment are you going to get? What are you going to do to improve your own club, etc.? That's what the challenge is. Does a super team come into town make any difference? No, I don't think it does.
Yeah, and with we mentioned the BBL, what kind of has to happen? Does it have anything to do with the head offices and whether that's bringing new, as you say, visionary people in to try and help stir the next generation of basketball fans?
I've always argued that the BBL was at its best when it had a strong head office, and it's got very good people in its head office at the moment. They are very good at selling tickets. They're very organized in running the day-to-day elements of the league. They're very good at that. What they don't do, it's not they're not good at, they just don't do. They're not a central leadership for the league. You know, they're not there to set a strategy. They're not there to be the face of the league. They're not there to have a long-term marketing, a central plan. You know, they have, there is Bob Hope, who's, is there for sponsorship rights, etc. But it's not a strong core that essentially dictates, and that's probably not the right word, but dictates the rest of the league. And this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to be a success. So that you are going to come and join us. It is very much a democratic process in the sense that the league is just really one voice amongst 12 voices effectively with the 11 clubs. I think good organisations have that. Even if you look at the Premier League, and the clubs have so much autonomy over what they do, but you still have very strong voices in the middle negotiating things and setting the benchmarks out there. And that's what the BBL needs. But they need investment for that. They need money. There's not the cash to employ that chief executive again that they had in the past when Mike Smith was chief executive of the league for a long time and was a very strong and influential figure. That's is the next step for the league. I don't sense that there's any resistance to having that, but it becomes about money, and the BBL needs the cash to do it.
Here's hoping Lawal then comes in soon and tries to buy the league, eh?
I think Lawal has his hands full with other projects at the moment. I wouldn't hold your breath for that.
Probably more important as well.
Yes.
So anyways, Mark, thank you so much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you here on the Let's Talk Basketball podcast.
Thanks for the invite, Reece. All the best.
Thank you very much. And if you have enjoyed this podcast, or if you're watching on YouTube, would you consider subscribing to the channel for more of these podcasts? If you're listening on Spotify, would you give us a follow and a nice review? Because why not? It's free. So yeah, Mark, thank you so much for joining me, and we will see you guys next time.